Yes guys, it's me Jackham. Today we're going to be running through the production behind my track Vibe, okay? I'm going to try go in as much depth as possible. This was requested by some members of the Discord, so we'll get into that. I'll post a link to the Discord in case anyone's interested. And yeah, let's crack on. So, Vibe is a very simple track, right? And just before we go into each individual kind of element, I want to talk about the tune kind of as a whole from a sort of top-down perspective. Because I think that that's just as kind of interesting and useful as kind of getting into like nitty-gritty technical aspects, right? So yeah, let's just quickly listen to the track for those who haven't heard it, and then we'll kind of break it down afterwards.
Vibe, it's about the vibe. Vibe, it's about the vibe. Vibe, it's about the vibe. Vibe, it's all about the vibe. Vibe, it's 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 all about the vibe. Vibe, it's 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 all about the vibe. Vibe, it's 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 all about the vibe. Vibe, it's 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 all about the vibe.
Alright, cool. So that's the gist of it. So let's talk about just the track in general first, right? So the whole tune is kind of based around two main elements, and that's this vocal, so this repeating vocal here. So we'll just play that.
Vibe, it's about the vibe. Vibe, it's about the vibe. Vibe, it's about the vibe. Vibe, it's all about the vibe.
So that's the entire vocal there that you've heard. There's no other bits of vocal. Like everything in the track is made from this one little section. Okay. So the track's based around that, and the track's also based around this big fuck off bass here. Don't know whether you'd call that foghorn or what, but those are the two main elements of this track. So very simple, right? There's not a lot going on vocal wise. There's also not a lot going on bass wise. So it's important with a tune like this to have a kind of real emphasis on variation, right? Because if we kind of analyze like the DNA of the track, you've got this big bass that comes in on the one, this big foghorn like bass, and then you've got this repeating vocal, and that's it really. So when you write a tune like this, there's a very real risk of it becoming like pretty boring for the for the listener, unless you kind of finesse it in a way that means that the track stays interesting. So just before we go into individual kind of elements, I just want to talk about this kind of structure and arrangement as a whole and my thoughts behind it. So we've got a 16-bar intro. Starts off very, very simply. There's not much going on. We've got kind of like some filtered down drums. So the tops of the track filtered here. It's been frozen. It's been rendered down into one piece of audio, but you can hear that there's reverb on there and maybe a bit of echo. Just reverb from the sounds of it. So we've got the tops from the drop, filtered. Starts out low passed. slowly opens up. And then at this point we introduce like a high cut, so we're filtering it up. Just to create tension right towards that drop. That's coupled with essentially the same thing going on with the vocals. We can hear that the vocals start out very filtered and they slowly open up. As we get towards the drop.
It's all about the vibe.
And that's just coupled with some like atmospheric effects, right? Rises, etc. So super simple intro, 16 bar intro, boom, straight into the track. When I made this track, I wanted it to just be a nice, simple, easy tune that you can kind of mix in and out of pretty much anything. And it's kind of just there to do a job. It's a moment in the set where it's a big, bassy, like fucking wobbly, you know, tune, big hooner. So with that in mind, we're not doing anything crazy arrangement-wise, right? We're keeping it nice and simple, easy to mix. It's there to kind of do a job, right? Let's talk about the differences and the variation throughout the track because I think it's important, right? If we listen to, I want you to just kind of focus in on the drums for the time being. So tune drop. You'll notice that it's basically just kick and clap. We have an interesting little drum fill here. But for that first 8 bars, it's literally just kick and clap. You know, there's no hi-hats or anything like that. It's just kick, clap, bass and vocal. So that's kind of important to note because, and this doesn't work for every track, but for this track, it's like the tune drops and the mix is super spacious, right? That big kind of growling bass has come in and there's lots of space in the mix for each individual element because there's not that much going on, right? Just kick and bass and vocal. Then after 8 bars, we then bring in some tops, so hi-hats, percussion, etc. But pay attention to the kick, right? The kick's still really sparse. I mean, if you look at the kick placement, it's basically just happening once every 2 bars.
It's all about the vibe.
So then we have a new section coming in here. So that's 16 bars there. So we've got some variation, right, in that mix is very sparse for 8 bars. We then bring in some top end elements, which is interesting. It feels like the track's moving forward. Then as we get to this second 16 bar section, we not only do we add a new element in the tops of the drums, so an open hi-hat. We have a kind of brighter open hi-hat there than we did here. But you'll notice that the kick is also a lot busier now, you know. The pattern that the kick's playing is a lot busier. There's more kicks going on. So that kind of, again, gives us this feeling of the track progressing, things are picking up, we're moving forward. You'll also notice that the bass is filtered compared to. So what that's doing is, one, it's adding variation. It's almost like a new sound now, even though it's the same patch, and we'll get into the patch in a little bit, but even though it's the same patch, we've shifted its tonality, we've made it darker by filtering out the top end of it. So one, that provides variation in that it sounds different from the last section, so it's not just a repeat, it's something new. But also, because it's filtered, it's giving us more space in the mix almost. It opens a mix up a bit because you've got all of these mids that are no longer there now, that can kind of almost get filled now with the busier drum patterns. Yeah. So it's interesting to note because it's almost like an inversion of the previous section. In the previous section, we had big full frequency bass and not very much drums, and then in the second 16 we have a lot more drums, but the bass has kind of taken a back seat, right? So it's almost like a flip of priority in the track. And this is just another way to add variation, guys, right? Because had we not added this kind of variation in, like this loop would get very, very boring very quick, you know? There's not much going on. So we have to, this track was almost like, not an experiment, but it's kind of like, it could be like a lesson in, I guess, like trying to be sort of clever with your variation and your use of sounds. And then if we carry this over to the third 16 bar, number one, we go back to the original kick pattern, so more sparse, but then also we've added a new kind of top end mid layer to the bass. We've got this really wobbly thing going on. So we're back to being more sparse with the kick, but we've added more kind of mid-top end elements to the 808, to the bass. But then also we've stripped the vocal back, right? So instead of it being the full
vibe,
the full vocal, we've just got this offbeat thing going on. So from each 16 bar section to 16 bar section, it's not huge, massive, like crazy changes that we're doing and switch ups. We're not completely switching up the entire track, but we're just kind of just rebalancing like where we want our listeners' attention to be. Obviously, this section here with the crazy bass, the bass is clearly the focus of this section. So we don't necessarily want or need people's attention to be on this full vocal, so we've stripped that vocal back a bit, right? It's almost like a rebalance every time, like we're rebalancing every time. So yeah, that's just, and then from there we just go into outro. Basically in the outro, you know, the bass is just happening half as much as it used to. So it was happening every 2 bars, was it? And then now, oh my god, it's fucking freezing in my studio. And then now it's only happening every 4 bars, okay? But that's just a brief overview. I just wanted to talk about that because I felt like some of you might find it interesting, because a lot of people struggle with variation, and I struggled with variation for a long time. But you can see that just by making little slight changes and really thinking about those changes, you can kind of get a lot of what I call it getting mileage out of a track, or getting mileage out of sounds, where you're just making little tweaks that just make them just different enough for the arrangement to stay interesting, but not so different that, you know, you're throwing an entirely new section and you have to produce, you know, an entirely new insane section to kind of switch things up. So yeah, let's look at these vocs. I'll just go through some, you know, this ain't going to be super interesting until we get to kind of drums and bass really, but the vocal, you know, low cut the vocal, fuse compressor is an OTT style compression, so with it, without it, with it, without it. So it's just bringing up like low level information, like it's kind of squashing it a bit. It's bringing a lot of high frequencies to the front. It's making it brighter. Yeah, it just makes the vocal sound a little bit more exciting, I suppose. And then that's just going into a reverb. So the only thing to note here is that I'm using an audio effect rack to basically split the wet and dry signals. So we've got one completely dry chain and one completely wet chain. And I just like doing that because you just get a finer control. You can individually set the level of the wet chain, and you can also put any effects on that you want after the fact. So you'll see that I've low and high passed, low and high cut rather, same thing I suppose. With an EQ of low and high cut, to just kind of, we're getting like mids and tops really, just out of that reverb. So there's that. Yeah, there's this version of the vocal which we kind of briefly spoke about, but it's the exact same thing but with a echo on it, quarter note echo, and a low pass filter, just to introduce it there. Smooth out that transition. And then the only other interesting thing to note is this track down here. So this is just, this has been rendered down into audio, but it's essentially just the original vocal but caked in a shitload of delay. And what's happening is that I'm slowly, throughout each 16 bar section, I'm slowly fading that audio in, so it's getting quieter as the section reaches, as we reach the end of the 16 bar section, right? So at the start it's super dry. But then as we get towards the end of the section, you're starting to hear it come in. And then it reaches its crescendo like there, right? So again, that's just another kind of little trick to, I guess, add variation and add movement. It's always, the track's always swelling up towards that next section. This is just working the same as like a reverse noise sweep would, or a riser would, except rather than being a synth that's going like boo, it's like it's echo coming up in volume, which it just adds movement to the track. It's pulling you towards that next section. We've got some effects here. Nothing crazy. We've got a little reverse, and we've got an actual reverse sweep as well. And then we've also got this thing here, which is just basically like textured audio. Like you can see, it's just, there's some Tweety Birds in there and some noise and kind of fizz. And I've high passed that a lot. And that's just adding like brightness and texture in the top end of the track. Nothing too crazy. That's that for the effects. There's some more down here. But to be honest, there's nothing fucking special or really exciting going on here. It's just risers, impact kind of breath effects, sweep downs. It's not groundbreaking stuff, guys. And these are just splice samples, really. Could I have made my own? Yes, but do I want to spend my time in the studio making reverses and risers and shit like that, or would I rather spend that making drums and bass? I think for me, drums and bass and vocal stuff's much more kind of interesting and exciting to do than like sweeps and risers. I don't think, there's, fuck, on Splice there must be like over 100,000 reverses and sweeps and whatever, so why not just use them? Let's talk about drums. So you'll see, what you'll notice, guys, on a lot of my drum tracks is that there's not that many plugins going on, especially on this track. There's literally this is the tops here. You'll see this K clip on a lot, but that's just a clipper that's set set to load on my tracks as a default, and that's just because I went through a period of trying the whole clip to zero thing where you clip every single sound, but it didn't really gel with me, so it's just left over from that, and I'm too lazy to turn them all off. So when you see a K clip, it's not really doing much apart from some specific ones, which I'll let you know if they are. So yeah, drums. Let's go to a busy section. Let's go to the busiest section, right? So that's, I think, basically here. So this is just the tops on their own. So I approach basically all my drums in a very similar way, right? And that will be that there'll be a 16th note element. So in this case, it's this. So that's shuffle, chicka 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 chicka, and it's kind of happening all the time, whether that's a shaker or whether I chop up a loop or use tambourines or whatever. There's always some kind of 16th note element in there. There's always an offbeat kind of hi-hat. So where is that? I think it's this one here. And then everything else is kind of just accents. So there's a break that I've chopped up here. And then there's lots of like little ghost percussions. So ghost percussion, not everyone might call it that, but basically these offbeat perks. So, you know, this kind of stuff. And again, these are just, I mean, some of them will be from my own personal sample collection, and some of these will just be like perks maybe off one shots off splice and stuff like that, but nothing crazy, right? And these are all swung, okay? So these are all swung to, I'm not sure what because I've committed the groove, but I'm a big fan of 16D swing. I mean, just 16th note swing in general, right? But yeah, look, there's nothing crazy to fucking talk about really with these drums, guys. Because I'm not using crazy plugins or anything. It's just short, snappy sounds that I like. Yeah, it's more like in the sample selection of these drums. And also, I mean, might as well just talk about it now, but my ethos with production, like I'm getting more and more into mixing stuff down lately and that kind of thing, but for a long time I was operating on just like a almost fuck it mentality, right? And this tune is a perfect example where the vibe of this tune, pardon the pun, is to just be a big, leery, angry, aggressive, like fucking wobbler for the rave, right? So I wasn't getting too finicky about the production process and everything being super clean and EQ'd super well and compressed and blah blah blah. Like, this track's just supposed to sound big, angry and distorted and kind of raw sounding, almost like unproduced, maybe you could describe it. So yeah, maybe a couple of hats are a bit too loud and poking out a bit and blah blah blah, but I think that, you know, it doesn't necessarily matter that much, especially when you're fucking playing it super loud in a rave. Like, I want this tune when it drops in a rave to be loud and kind of out of control and leery and raw, and that's how it sounds, right? So I'm not worried too much. Let's just look at the rim. So you might be used to calling your main kind of 2 and 4 sound as your snare or clap or whatever. I always think of them as rims, because if you listen, I mean, there's obviously, this has been made, and I'll do a video on Patreon on how I kind of go about making my rims, but this is essentially, will just be made from a like a rim shot, some kind of rim shot sound, whether it's a splice one shot or something I've found in a pack, or like a 707 rim I'll start with a lot of the time, but a woody kind of rim sound, and then I'll just layer that with like the tail top end of a clap, or maybe a Foley sound or another percussion sound, just to get that tonality. And then if you let's turn off that echo. So this has got quite a long tail, but it's a reverb tail that's been printed down. But yeah, for garage, like short kind of snap. Oh, for how I like my rims, I like them short and snappy. Yeah, so that's that.
Vibe, the massive vibe, 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 the massive vibe. vibe, about the vibe, it's all about the vibe.
Again, guys, I'm not going to go into like advanced kind of programming on this because, yeah, I'll do a separate video on that at some point. But yeah, just drums arranged in a way that I like, that sound good to me, minimal processing, and yeah, job's a good one. So let's look. What's this sound here? It's just like a big clap with loads of delay on it and reverb.
Vibe, about the vibe.
That's just adding a bit of texture. Let's get into this bass because I think that's probably what most people maybe are interested in. We can see it's got a big old chain here. So what I'll do is I'll take everything off the chain. I'll turn everything off, and we will kind of walk through it. Okay, so this is our starting sound. It's just a sample data weight. Oh, there's something going on actually. I've left an effect on. I've definitely left an effect on somewhere, but I can't find it because I can hear that it's on. Oh, here. What have I left on? Oh, right, yeah, that's fine. Right, that's the starting sound there, guys. So it's just an 808. I've messed with the attack and release, so before it was like this. Sustain all the way up, and I've just lowered the distain and added a bit of decay. Yeah, so first in the chain is these two EQs, right? So all these are doing is boosting one of the overtones or harmonics in the bass line. So you can see this harmonic here at about 200 hertz. I'm just boosting that. So with the rack off and with it on, off, on. Now that's important because we're going to distort this sound, and you just get interesting results when you boost harmonics into distortion. Like you just always get super interesting results, I find, rather than just like boost and the harmonic specifically, because rather than just boosting a sub, like if you just boost sub into distortion, like you'll essentially just end up with like not exactly a square, but something resembling either a square or like a saw wave. It's pretty predictable what you'll get, but if you start pushing different frequencies in to distortion, different harmonics, you'll get different results. So I'll show you that when we eventually get to the distortion. I'll toggle this on and off, and you'll hear what's happening. But yeah, two EQs boosting the exact same frequency. I know it's like 4 and 8. 194, 198, but they're boosting that 200 hertz-ish harmonic. The maximum amount on each, so 15. So we boosted a total of about 30 dB. That then goes into this little rack here. So this is little radiator. It's just a saturation plug-in from Sound Toys. And what I'm essentially doing is I'm running it in parallel, and I am distorting it, and then filtering it, so that we're just kind of getting low mids and mids. So we're getting from 100 hertz to about 600. So yeah, like mids and low mids. So off, on. So that's just giving us more frequencies to work with, more frequency content in the mids and low mids. That's then running into two erosions. So erosion 1 on sine mode adds like that bit crushy effect, and erosion 2 is on wide noise mode, so without it and then with it. You can hear that without the erosion, without the noise erosion, there's not much going on in the high end. And again, this is going to be important for the distortion, because if you want really crunchy kind of, gritty crunchy distortion, you want lows, but you also want high frequency content, because the way that the low frequencies and high frequencies interact inside of the distortion, that's what's going to give you that papery kind of crunch and grit, I suppose, on the top end. So I'm adding some noise there. It's then going into fuse compressor, which is OTT style of compression. It's good because I don't use it that much anymore, to be honest, guys. But I went through a patch of using this all the time. It's got clippers built into the output if you want. So yeah, it's kind of useful because you can push things pretty far in it, and instead of it, well, it'll clip in a pleasing way. So that's doing two things, right? It's adding a bit of brightness because it's pulling all that noise up, but it's also making that harmonic. You know, this 200 hertz. It's kind of almost lengthening that harmonic. With it off, you can feel that harmonic fade away much quicker. With it on. And that 200, that's kind of the vibe. Pardon the pun again. That's the whole like point of the sound, is really for me that 200 hertz kind of chest type vibe. So yeah, we've got that. That's running into a reverb that's on probably a pretty low dry wet, about 30%. I like putting reverb on before distortion because it just interacts with the distortion in a super interesting way. Yeah, you can just get kind of unexpected results, and it can also add a bit of width as well. Although nowadays I would be lowering the stereo amount on if I was using this reverb, because the way Ableton stock plugins handle reverb, when you eventually collapse it down to mono, it can sound basically dog shit. So not how I would probably do it nowadays, but it's how I did it at the time. And then we get into the actual distortion. So you can hear that finally we're getting the kind of heavy lifting at the end. And this is just thermal on its default preset, and I've just opened up the controls here, and I've just used exponential. I was a big fan. Well, thermal sounds great, but I always used to use this exponential distortion type. Yeah, it just sounds wicked. I'm driving it by 16 dB. And just to kind of demonstrate now, if we go back and turn off these two EQs from the start where we were boosting at 200 hertz, if we turn them off and listen to it, versus on, versus off again, it definitely still sounds cool. It's like still a usable sound, but to me, like, it's just emphasising certain frequencies, right? It's making the distortion react in a different way than it would, which I found interesting. And then finally, one sec, guys. Sorry, guys, there was somebody at the door. Yeah, sorry. So finally, we've just got fuse compressor again, and it's on the more aggressive clip mode, and I've backed off the mids basically. So without that, the mids are a bit too far forward. I could have done this with an EQ. You could do this with an EQ. For some reason I did it with fuse compressor. I mean, I guess it's like because we're clipping it, we're getting two different things going on, right? We're managing that mid frequency, taming it a bit, but then also getting a tiny bit more distortion at the end. It's also much quieter. So yeah, that's the first instance of the bass. The second version of it is just the exact same patch but filtered. And then the only other important one to talk about is this fucking crazy one here. So what we've done is basically we've split the lows and the mids and lows and then mids and highs. So we've got a sub here. It's just doing the low end. And then we've got this layer on top. And this is, again, it's the same patch No, it's not the same patch. So it's almost the same patch, but I'm using the FM inside of Sampler. So for those that don't, some people might not realise you can do this, but Sampler has an FM, has the ability to do FM inside of it. So for it to work properly, you have to have the root note set correctly. I believe, I'm 90% sure that you have to have the root note set correctly. So this is a C, it's in the 0 octave, so C0, and then yeah, you can turn on this FM oscillator here, and you can get all different kinds of tones, right? So this is really cool for variation because, you know, just by adding a bit of FM, you get a completely different vibe and sound. But then also, this is running through this Max for Live device called Slink Filter. So I couldn't tell you exactly what this is doing because it's like this plugin's bizarre, but it sounds insane on bass. What it's essentially, I think, filtering. I think it's like complex filtering, basically. I mean, if I just mess around with some of these, you can hear that there's just endless like possibilities. This thing's a fucking beast. It sounds so cool. So yeah, that's a big part of that bass. I've just messed around with it and decided that those settings sound cool. So yeah, that's that. Just the same patch, but with a bit of FM in the sampler, and then run through Slink. And then yeah, the only other thing to talk about is these kind of things that happen in between the bass, just to fill up space. And that's essentially, it's this sound here. All I've done there is I've recorded the bass, I've resampled the bass, right? And then I've resampled the bass, added reverb to it, and then reversed that. So it originally sounded like this. And then I've just like reversed it and just isolated the reverb tail, right? And that's cool because not only does it fill up space in the mix, makes your track sound a bit more full, but it also just gives this cool swelling effect. It's like I call these sucks, but it's like pulling you into the next bass hit. And you can do this sort of thing for all kinds of different sounds. It works well on vocals, synths, all sorts. So it's really cool. But yeah, I mean, that's basically it. This tune's really simple. Did I say soon then, or did I say tune? I don't know. Anyway, this track's super simple. Nothing crazy going on. It's more just about space, I guess, and I don't want to say clever because it sounds like I'm calling myself clever, but attempting to cleverly use variation and to manipulate people's attention, I guess, throughout the track. So yeah, hopefully that has kind of been helpful for people. Like I say, I've not gone mega in depth on stuff because I'm gonna start the Patreon up basically and go a bit more in depth on there on things, but yeah, hopefully it's helpful. And if you want to see any other types of content from me, just drop a comment. Yeah, big up.